This is the Lumix S5 Mark II. The big issue many creators have complained about is finally fixed: the autofocus. Panasonic flew several other creators and myself to Tokyo to unveil the new Lumix S5 Mark II and the surprise camera, which we will get to at the end of this video. Panasonic wanted to tell us they finally did it. They added phase detect for the first time in the new S5 Mark II. This is the way. Wait. No. This means in theory, all cameras moving forward will have it as well. This is a huge deal as the rest of the industry has moved over to this type of technology for autofocus, and it was indeed a moment worth celebrating when Panasonic announced this to the group of creators. Cut to that shot of literally standing ovation when they announced it. Phase detect autofocus. Say it with me. Phase detect autofocus. Say it with me. Phase detect autofocus. Say it with me. Yahoo! Very exciting. If you're not familiar with what phase detect autofocus is, what it means is that you can now trust Panasonic to nail your focus in the way that we've trusted Canon and Sony to do this for several years. Panasonic for years has been using contrast-based DFD autofocus system, which has actually been very accurate in terms of tracking the human subject and tracking the eye. But when you actually look at the footage, the autofocus is actually pulsing back and forth constantly. It's kind of second guessing itself as it locks onto the face. It wants to check to make sure it's not the background or the foreground that it's supposed to focus on, and it's just constantly jiggling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's just not something that is useful as a filmmaker, especially. If you're a photographer and you're using it, it was kind of easy to get around this system, and it was accurate enough for focusing for stills because it would basically just go and then boom, lock on, you take your shot and you nail your focus. But for video, this just did not look natural at all. An AC who would be pulling focus would never just kind of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth as you're focusing. And phase detect or Canon system dual pixel autofocus uses technology, I don't even really fully understand it, that basically is able to lock onto your subject and not give a bunch of warping and wobbling going on in the background. If you're in the camera world, you may already know all of this, but finally, it has come to the Panasonic. I mean, look at this. This is incredible. I've found the S5 Mark II to give us close to Canon and Sony autofocus performance. And I'm sure with time, it'll continue to get even better. In fact, I made an entire video all about the autofocus on this camera on my personal channel. So if you want to watch that video where I shot most of it in Tokyo, it's linked down in the description. Panasonic is using AI to assist the autofocus. Human tracking is what you want for most cases, but there are several other modes that you can play around with here. It can track animals, it can track boats, trains, planes, automobiles, all sorts of different things. And you can kind of get into the weeds of all the different autofocus modes. But to put it simply, the human AI autofocus tracking is the best. When it sees a face, it locks onto the eyeball. And when you turn your face away from the camera, the AI is smart enough to determine that this subject is a human and I want to track that human. The system itself is really great, and it's been great for years with other Panasonic cameras, but now with phase detect, it is truly competent and truly useful and reliable, thank goodness. By the way, Panasonic did pay for my trip to Tokyo. All this stuff was given to us. I think it's important to mention, but I do recognize and understand that this is quite ridiculous. This is Chris's LaCroix, not a sponsor. Speaking of sponsor, this video is brought to you by Soundstripe, the channel you're watching right now. All the music that we use in all these videos is from, of course, soundstripe.com, the best place to get high quality, custom made music. Check it out, soundstripe.com, and sign up using the link below. The S5 Mark II has a similar 24.2 megapixel sensor in it to the original S5, which means we get a true 6K to 4K down res, but with the S5 Mark II, we have open gate recording, giving us the full 5.8K readout of the sensor, all for a beautiful price point of only $19.99.
For some real magic, because we're going to double the entire offer free with your paid order.
That's right, under $2,000 by $1, which is a huge deal compared to similar cameras in this price bracket. Canon has the R6 Mark II at $24.99, and Sony has the A7 IV at a similar price point as well. So this is hitting below that price bracket, which I think is very important. And it's giving us, honestly, a lot more than some of those cameras can do. Like many other Lumix bodies, this camera has many recording options. In 6K open gate, we can record in a 3:2 aspect ratio in 10-bit 420 200 megabits per second, which is an HEVC codec. But for the standard 4K shooting modes, you can record in a full 422 10-bit up up to 30 frames per second. And that's in the full frame mode. For high frame rate shooting, this camera can shoot up to 180 frames per second in HD. But my preferred slow motion mode on this camera is actually the 4K 60 frames per second mode, which unfortunately does have a crop in Super 35, but it's manageable if you're able to have the lenses needed for that operation. And it's a full 422 4K 60 mode. Very nice, but it's cropped, so keep that in mind. There's no time limit with recording on this camera in all modes, and I think it's possible because Panasonic has done a really great job engineering the fan system on this camera. Can't really even see it because it's hidden beneath the EVF. The intake valve on this camera is actually right below the EVF here, and the outtake vents are on the sides here. This is a true fan system that's cooling the processor and the sensor inside of it and allowing us to shoot in these crazy open gate 6K recording modes, but keeps the overall size of this camera incredibly small. I don't have a GH6 to compare this to, but I have talked to some people that have used the GH6. I think Panasonic themselves have even admitted the S5 Mark II, being a full frame camera, is actually smaller in size than the Micro Four Thirds GH6 camera, which is very interesting and a real marvel in terms of engineering. IBIS is best in class, and for a video camera, you can't get much better than this. IBIS stands for in-body image stabilization, and it moves the sensor around to stabilize any handheld shooting you are doing, getting out all the little micro jitters and bumps, essentially removing the need for a monopod or easy rig, which is what Chris is having to use right now. But this camera has two additional electronic stabilization modes. E-stabilization, which should smooth out any weird wobbles from walking or moving. And it's designed to stabilize the footage kind of like a gimbal, but it does crop in on the image a little bit though. And then there's Boost IS, which is an electronic stabilization mode that is designed to simulate the look of a tripod. And it's quite mind-blowing, really. If you're wanting to just have a nice, stable shot and you don't happen to have a set of sticks with you, turn on Boost IS, hold it still, and it's gonna look like a tripod. Again, it does crop in even more than E-stabilization, but it's a very useful tool if you're needing a tripod shot and you don't have one. And to top all this off, Panasonic is the only company on the market making hybrid cameras with a true anamorphic stabilization mode, which leads me to anamorphic shooting on this camera. It has it. True anamorphic shooting in 4:3 aspect ratio. That means that you can use traditional, old, amazing Super 35 anamorphic lenses on this camera, full 2x stretch and everything. I know Chris is foaming at the mouth as I say this, and I think that the anamorphic mode paired with the anamorphic stabilization mode makes this a very compelling anamorphic cinema camera. So when you're in the Super 35 mode, this camera can shoot true anamorphic 4:3 aspect ratio up to 4K at 48 frames per second, which is perfect for music videos. A lot of music video shooters will shoot people singing basically at double speed, the music, and then you slow that down in post-production 2x and it looks super dreamy. You see this with, I think, Coldplay's Yellow music video is the first time that I saw it, and it's been used ever since on many other videos. And it was all yellow. In addition to the amazing IBIS mode with anamorphic, you can actually monitor your anamorphic shooting on the screen, completely de-squished because it's got all those things built into it. So you can monitor it, you can shoot with stabilization, you can shoot in a full 4:3, and of course you've got 10-bit, all that crazy stuff. This is an amazing cinema tool. And I think honestly Panasonic is quite underrated for cinematographers. People may look to Blackmagic or other companies to shoot cinema stuff. And I think they should really consider looking at Lumix because they're giving us a lot of great options here for anamorphic shooting, which a lot of companies don't do. A lot of the things I just mentioned are things that Panasonic has done for years now, and those things obviously carry over to the S5 Mark II. We've got waveforms, focus peaking, great audio preamps, and the ability to use their XLR module. This camera can do focus racks using the built-in software, can shoot at proper shutter angle, and now with the ability to bake in a LUT to your footage using the new real-time LUT profile. You can load in a LUT and bake it into your footage if you want, or of course you can load in a LUT and monitor off of it, but still shoot in a log format. This real-time LUT profile is kind of designed for people who don't want to do color grading in post, but they may develop their own LUT in Resolve and they want to output that and essentially bake it into your footage moving forward. This is great for cinematographers who want full control over things, and maybe you're shooting a multicam with producers and editors who aren't going to interface with you. You could essentially on set create your own look and then load it into all of your cameras and bake it into the footage so there's no way to go back. Obviously, the downside of that is it's not log, it's not raw, so you can't change it back to anything. It's literally baked into the footage, but it is there if you need it. Because the S5 Mark II has a similar sensor to the original S5, the dynamic range is essentially the same. Panasonic states it has 14 plus stops of dynamic range in vlog, but in Cine D's tests, they claim that the S5 has a quote, solid 12 stops of dynamic range, but 14 stops are undoubtedly present. The S5 Mark II also shares the dual native ISO sensor from the S5, which means when shooting in vlog, your two native ISOs are 640 and 4000. So let's say you're shooting with this camera and you need a little bit more juice in your low light performance and you crank it up to say 3200. That's about the proper exposure for your shot. It would actually be better for you to just go up a little bit higher to ISO 4000 and then just bring things down either with your lighting or ND or aperture, because 4000 ISO is actually cleaner and has better dynamic range than 3200, even though that is technically a lower ISO setting. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it, but essentially try to stick with those two native ISOs if you can. As for the body of this camera, I've really enjoyed it. It feels good in the hand and it has impressive battery life. The full-sized HDMI is an upgrade to the previous version. The USB-C port can fully power and charge this camera, which leads me to the bonus camera Panasonic announced at the event. The S5 Mark II XXX. This is the camera Batman would carry because
I only work in black.
Which looks so amazing. Come on, come on. I want black everything. It is $300 more for this version. What you get in addition to everything being all black is the ability to record out of the USB-C port in ProRes and use the camera for live streams either wired or wireless. Using the USB-C to SSD, you can record 5.8K ProRes up to 800 megabits per second. This is nuts, and I'm looking forward to comparing the two cameras next to each other, but honestly, I just want the X for the all black everything, other than the ProRes and the wireless wired live stream options. Both of the cameras are essentially the same. Get the X, it's black. What this all means for Panasonic is big news. Flying a bunch of creators to Tokyo and giving them all of these lenses and a camera wasn't cheap, and Panasonic is making a big statement here with their mid-range camera, the S5 Mark II and 2X. It's signaling to Canon and Sony that Panasonic isn't out of the race yet, but more than that, they're listening to what users want and are exhibiting the desire to change things up based on what their customers and future customers want, all while providing incredible value compared to their competitors and doing it all with style. As a Canon cinema camera shooter myself, I find this camera actually more attractive than say the R6 Mark II, simply because of the incredible video features. And I think Sony shooters may have to consider Lumix cameras as a real option when looking to upgrade in the future. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you want to learn more about the autofocus of this camera, check out my personal video on my channel. I'm trying to figure out how to end it, how to land the plane. Bloop.